Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about this really cool plant, Califurbia subedentata, also known as the mini Amazon lily or the green supreme. These are by far one of the most underrated houseplants in my opinion. Honestly, I've looked around on YouTube, there's not that many videos on care for these, which doesn't make sense because they're a fantastic houseplant that are actually quite easy to keep. So I figured I'd do that service and make a little care video on them for you guys. So in nature, these are found in northwest Colombia. They are an understory plant found in the rainforest. So for the most part, they're under the canopy. They get anything from bright indirect light to dappled sunlight to even low light and shady areas. What does that mean for you? It means these are a pretty light, versatile plant. So most people can find somewhere in their home to keep these quite happily. Fully grown, this plant in the wild can reach up to 1 meter tall. However, I honestly don't think most people are going to achieve that, keeping them in a pot in their home. On average, most people keeping them in their home have them around 30 to 45, maybe 60 centimeters as an average. So really, they're not an overly huge plant if you want a house plant that doesn't get too big. If you can give this plant pretty decent lighting, they will also flower as a little bonus as well. I'll pop a picture up of what the flowers look like, as mine, as you can see, doesn't have any flowers, yes. So when you're looking for a spot to put this plant in your home, ideally you'd want to give it bright light, as bright as you can give it. Indirect lighting, of course. However, this plant can tolerate lower lighting if that's the only option you have, but it just won't grow as quickly and won't get as big. But it can tolerate it and still live relatively well. But if you have the option to give it bright indirect light, you will find it'll grow much bigger, much faster. These plants can also tolerate some direct sunlight as well. Not direct sun for the entire duration of the day, as they may go a bit crispy, especially during the summertime, but a bit of morning or afternoon sun generally won't hurt this plant. They have a very waxy leaf, as you can see, very thick waxy cuticle to their leaf. So it takes a lot for this plant to go crispy. They got that kind of durability to their leaf. Now, watering this plant is actually pretty good as well in comparison to a peace lily, which is probably one of the most commonly kept houseplants ever. I swear everyone who has houseplants has a peace lily in their collection. No hate on peace lilies though, I've got them myself in their own right. They're a pretty good houseplant. I will say though, this plant does have one up on the peace lily, even though they kind of look a bit like a variety of peace lily. They're very similar. But the thing is, peace lilies can't have dry soil for very long. As soon as their soil goes dry, they dramatically wilt, and you have to kind of water them pretty quickly to get them to bounce back again. So, a bit annoying, you can't like leave them alone for too long. That's where this plant kind of overtakes the peace lily as far as the watering requirements go. This plant can have dry soil for a little while before it needs water again. The main reasons for this are going back to these glossy leaves, which kind of is what the whole big deal is about this plant. It's very glossy, it's very appealing, but that thick waxy cuticle, which is giving it that really nice glossy appearance, does actually serve other purposes as well. And one of them is it helps retain water longer. Not as much water evaporates through the stomatas of the leaves on this plant compared to something like a peace lily. That combined with the fact that this plant also has kind of thicker and more succulenty leaves and stems, and it grows from bulbs. So peace lilies and a lot of other variety houseplants out there that are more water demanding generally just have a root system and that's it. This plant grows from bulbs, and the main purpose of a bulb, other than being the start of the plant when it's like growing from the bulb itself as a seedling, an established plant still retains its bulbs and even produces more and more of them. Outside of propagation, the other purpose is to store food and water. So in the bulb, there'll be sugar, there'll be starches, and there'll be water. Basically, this plant has backup reserves of water and food that it can tap into whenever it wants to when the soil goes dry. So if anything, the easiest way to kill one of these is to overwater them. So I would honestly recommend you water it, fully saturate the plant when you do water it so it's evenly wet through the soil, and then don't water it again until that soil is almost completely dry. If you do this, these plants will thrive. They actually hate being wet all the time. So if you're the sort of person who isn't great at keeping tabs on when you last watered your houseplants and you have a very busy lifestyle, and maybe you forget to even look at it for a while, this plant would be a great option, at least as far as the watering requirements and lighting requirements go. Well draining soil is another key factor to keeping these plants successfully. This goes back to them not liking being overly saturated and wet for too long. When you do water them, you want to water them thoroughly and evenly, but you don't want the soil to stay wet for too long. That's why well draining soil is crucial for these. So look, you can buy a pre-made mix of like Aeroid mix or something from your local nursery. A lot of plant nurseries do sell their own like home brand mixes of soil for different varieties of plants. And there are Aeroid mixes you can buy pre-made and they will do perfectly fine. You can make your own as well. Just use a general indoor plant potting mix and mix in some perlite in with that, maybe a bit of orchid bark or something. Anything from 15 to 20% perlite and orchid bark to soil should be fine. Fertilizing these is pretty standard. It's kind of the same as most indoor house plants. So you can use pelletized or a liquid-based fertilizer. I personally like the liquid stuff better, but you can use a seaweed or a fish emulsion indoor plant fertilizer as well. Either is honestly fine. Now look, there's a couple of ways you can fertilize and it's totally up to you which way you want to go with this. It all depends on you and how good your memory is for these things. In the past, in my other plant care videos, you may have remembered that I used to say, fertilize the plants every month during the growing seasons of spring, summer, and autumn. And that is still something that's perfectly fine to do if you're good at remembering in a month's time that you fertilized last month and it's due to go again. But honestly, I kind of struggle with that. I'll fertilize the plants once a month. Well, I'll try to at least. And sometimes I'll lose track of how many weeks it's been. So for me, I've actually found it easier to just fertilize them weekly with a diluted dose of liquid fertilizer. It's easier to remember to do something once a week than once a month for me. And as long as I dilute the dose of fertilizer down appropriately, I'm technically not actually adding any more fertilizer than I was before. So essentially what I mean is if your fertilizer hypothetically says to use 1 capful of fertilizer per 10 liters of water once a month, and you want to start doing it weekly as a diluted dose instead. So let's say you have that 10-liter watering can that you use once a week for your plants anyways. Rather than do the 1 capful for the 10 liters of water only on a monthly basis because you have trouble remembering when you last did it, you could do 1/4 of a cap every week in the 10 liters of water instead. And in 1 month or 4 weeks time, you'll have essentially given your plants that 1 capful per month anyway. It's just spread out over the 4 weeks instead of all in one go. Now, you don't need to repot these too often. These guys kind of like being a little compact in their pot before you repot them, so you don't need to stress about it too much. If they're in a really good bright spot and they're growing quite quickly, you could repot them every year or every 2 years or so. It doesn't matter too much. Like I was saying, they don't mind being a bit compact for a while. You kind of know with plants that have bulbs especially when they need a repot, because the pot itself will actually start to kind of deform a bit because the bulbs will be pressing out on the sides of the plastic pot and kind of, yeah, they might even crack it, or you might have bulges in your pot and stuff like that. If it's at the point where it's like mostly roots and not much soil in your pot, or if you're watering and water's just draining straight through extremely quickly and it's not really retaining any of it in the pot, that is a sign you need to repot. But outside of that, you don't need to worry too much. You can go up anything from 1 to 2 pot sizes each time you do repot with these. But again, you don't need to rush to repot these. They're pretty good in a tight pot for some time. Unless, of course, they're not retaining water anymore, then yes, definitely up the pot size and add some new soil. These plants aren't too bad with pests either. They're not overly prone to them. Now, I'm not saying they don't get pests. I'm sure there's Green Supreme mini Amazon lilies out there that have had pests, but for the most part, they're not that pest prone. They can get scale, they can get mealybugs, but it's usually not a common thing with these. If you look after them well and they're really happy and growing well, they really shouldn't get pests unless you've got another plant that is infected with pests that's touching this plant and they can kind of jump over. But generally these really glossy type plants aren't a pest's first choice. They're just very hard to get through to the sap in the leaves. So really, unless this plant's struggling and it's not doing well, it's probably not going to attract pests. If you do get a pest problem, it is treatable. I use white oil. It's a petroleum jelly spray. I essentially just spray the plant with it, makes it look really glossy. Not that this plant needs it though. And that fixes up most of the indoor pests pretty quickly. General maintenance on this plant's not too bad. Look, other than just keeping the leaves nice and clean, so maybe once every week or two, you can go around and wipe your leaves, or just throw it in the shower and give it a good wash in there. You don't want dust building up on the leaves if you can avoid it, because this does kind of inhibit the plant's ability to photosynthesize properly. So yeah, keep the leaves nice and clean. Any damaged, dead or dying leaves, cut them off. Do a general check for pests maybe every week or two, but like I said, they're not that prone to that, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. And outside of that, there's not much you really have to do for these. Propagating these is honestly kind of similar to a peace lily or a homolamina of some variety. You do it when you're repotting. So like I was saying before, these plants grow from bulbs. So it's not something you can just take cuttings from. You have to wait till you're doing the repotting of this plant. And if it's a big enough plant, you don't want to do it on a small one. But if it's a big plant and it's got multiple bulbs with multiple separate plants growing from them, you can just split them up, whether that be with a sharp knife, a pair of scissors, or you can just kind of part them with your hands if you're able to. As long as whatever section of plant you've parted away has roots, doesn't necessarily have to have a bulb on it, but it should have a decent amount of roots. You can just pot that up on its own and it should grow fine. The only other thing to remember when you're working on this plant, or if you have pets, is the Green Supreme is toxic like most tropical houseplant. So if you have pets that do like to nibble on your plants and play with them and stuff, maybe put this where they can't get to it, because it is a toxic plant. Not at the same level as something like a ZZ plant or even a peace lily. Its toxin isn't as strong and it has to be ingested in a much higher dose to have a really serious effect in comparison to your more typical houseplants that are known for being toxic. But saying that, it is still toxic. So again, keep it away from your pets if they're prone to touching your plants. Just something to keep in mind. But given this plant's versatility with lighting requirements, the fact that it actually prefers to go a bit dry before you water it again, the fact that it's not overly pest prone either, I'm going to give this plant a ranking of easy. I think anybody can keep this plant if they just follow a few simple rules. Rightio guys, so that's my video on the Green Supreme Mini Amazon Lily. If a stocky, glossy, floppy green plant is something that appeals to you, maybe this plant's the one for you. If you've enjoyed this video guys, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. If you would like to donate to the channel, you can buy me a coffee. It's in the description just below the video. Until then, I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.